Welcome to another episode of The Marketer's Edge, a series designed to share senior level marketing perspective about marketer challenges, opportunities, and agency relationships. Our goal is to help marketers and agencies learn from other marketers across different industries. Today, we're talking with Renee McIntyre, Director of Sales and Marketing at Scully Company. Scully specializes in multifamily real estate in both ownership and management capacities, currently managing over 7,000 units. Renee, thanks so much for joining us today. How have you been?
I have been great. Thank you for asking.
That's great. Yeah, sounds like we were talking a little bit earlier. Sounds like you've had a busy week, but it sounds like it was fun. So that's always a good thing. So
Yes, yeah, great. Doing the stuff I love to do,
that's
being out
awesome.
and about.
That's awesome. So I've got a handful of questions for you, but before I dive into those questions, can you tell me a little bit about Scully and your role in the organization so our listeners know what kind of company it is and what you do for them?
Sure, absolutely. So Scully Company we are about to go on our 75th year
Hmm.
in business.
Wow.
It is a third generation multifamily property management company, which is really a fancy way of saying, because when I came into the industry, I didn't know what multifamily was at first. We manage apartment communities.
Okay.
So we own and manage our own portfolio. We also do third party management for investors and other developers. We do consulting. So developers who are building their own projects will get involved really early and kind of help them with
Okay.
figuring out what kind of unit sizes to make, how many, what the amenity package should be, everything you can think of in the project. And then we also sometimes develop our own projects. So create new communities on our own and acquire communities that are already created.
Okay.
So we have a portfolio currently in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Connecticut, and South Florida.
Okay.
We're looking to kind of expand into the Boston market more. And, what we really do is we provide homes and help people find homes and kind of curate lifestyles for them. So we have over 15,000 residents that we serve. And for me, within the company, I'm our director of sales and marketing. So I handle all of our marketing, leasing, branding, PR for the portfolio, and also for Scully Company as the brand. So it's a big role.
Not bad.
It's a small company. I like to call us a big small company because we have, you have like the really like boutique mom and pop shops, and then huge like national and global companies, and we're kind of that sweet spot in the middle. So it's a fun place to be because you really get to, in my role, I really get to touch every department and kind of really be involved in the product as well.
That's great. That's great. I'm curious. Has Scully always been in this business in one way or another?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So founded just about 75 years ago by our current president's grandfather. And he started by building homes,
Okay.
and then it expanded into apartments. And then, her uncle and father are ownership as well. They're still involved. And the president is third generation.
Very cool.
So
Very cool.
it's
Wow.
exciting.
Love stories like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
75 years is a long time.
it
Uh,
is. We're excited to celebrate.
yeah, I bet. That's awesome. So I'm just curious, what would you sort of say are the biggest challenges that you face as director of marketing and sales for this multi-location property management group?
Sure. So I would say bandwidth and brand control would be the
Okay.
top two.
Okay.
So bandwidth, it's myself and a department of two or three others.
Okay. Got it.
And we support 38 multifamily properties. We actually have a hotel as well. It's like a one-off in Ocean City, New Jersey. So we like to do that, a small boutique hotel. And, between working with the new business department on consulting and then doing Scully's internal and external branding and marketing, it's, bandwidth, it becomes a challenge.
Sure.
So the second piece that's kind of connected to that is the brand control. So with all of these individual properties, some are very close, some are down in South Florida, one out in Connecticut. And it's a challenge to take people who are on site, who have to kind of be your extension of your marketing department.
Right.
And their operations people, they're operations focused, and kind of instill in them the importance of branding and keeping our brand consistent. For them, they are phenomenal. They're there to serve our residents. They do a fantastic job. And for them, they're all kind of individual businesses.
Okay.
So it's kind of teaching and giving them the skills and the tools to be able to take our full brand. But what can probably feel like a little bit of an island when you're working with those same people every day, they get ideas. They want to create something that they think is exciting and have a different way of presenting, a packet to someone. It's kind of creating the structure to keep all of that consistent.
Right,
So,
right. So when you talk about brand control, is it both in sort of how the brand presents itself outwardly as well as sort of the brand being sort of a service entity as well?
yeah, I mean, the service side I would say that's easier.
Okay,
We do a really great job with training and really instilling our core
got
values
it.
into everyone and kind of training them to be able to make the right decision for the Scully brand on their own.
Right, right.
It's more the design facing brand.
Got it.
Everyone's not a designer, but they still have to create some communications on their
Sure.
own. So we provide them as many templates as we can and things to work off as we can,
Got it.
and go site to site and make sure that that's all
It's getting
still
done. Yeah.
intact.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Interesting. Yeah. I would
Yep.
imagine that would be quite a challenge just to try and maintain that consistency. And I've seen, other organizations not in your space sort of deal with similar challenges and use portals to, let people go in and grab templates and things like that. So it sounds like you're doing, somewhat similar things to try and control,
Yeah.
the equity and communication for the brand. So
Yeah.
yeah. And
Absolutely. I think the easier that you make it for, the more access you give and the more tools you can create, and the easier you make it for someone to go and get that right piece, um, you know, then they don't tend to make their own as much.
right, right, yeah.
Yeah.
And so my next question, you may have answered it, but there may be other elements that you may want to speak to. I was going to ask you how do you address what I suspect is a need to localize marketing at each property, yet still maintaining some measure of efficiency in your overall spend?
Yeah, sure. So one thing that does help is the size of our company and the structure.
Okay,
So having every community set up as a separate entity helps. So
okay,
it's not like we're taking one spend and trying to split it across all of the properties.
got it.
Each one has its own budget. We
Okay,
created its own marketing plan, and we're very specific in everything we do. So every community has its own plan, and we look at all of who's living there, the research that we have, the information we have, to decide what those best options are and where we get the best return.
hmm,
So we spend a lot of time analyzing that. And then for localizing, it's a team effort. We really collaborate. So we know the marketing side and buying behavior and what residents desire and those types of things. But we collaborate with the local team to ask them, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you visually experiencing? We work with a lot of local organizations too.
okay,
So like the small like neighborhood associations,
okay.
we partner with them a lot. We build our network. A lot of it is relationship based too, because
Is
we're
it?
able to get a lot of that content and know the who's who, whether it's a community down the street or a community that's thousands of miles away.
Okay, okay, yeah. I was um I was going to ask you about just technology and whether or not it plays a role in the overall management and maintenance of properties, of the overall management of your marketing activities. Do you use a lot of technology and or data to make decisions? And if so, sort of how does that play out?
Yeah, we use technology. It's actually a really great question because I would say as an industry, the multifamily industry hasn't always been the front runner in technology and
Sure.
has probably spent the last 6 years, 7 years, maybe between 6 and 10 years catching up, and the
Okay.
past couple years have just been like
Crazy.
fast forward.
Okay.
Yeah. So what might have been different 10 years ago, now like technology is in almost every piece of what we do from an operational standpoint and a
Okay.
marketing standpoint.
Okay.
Um, the entire sales process from your application to we have a moving concierge set up that helps everyone do the dreaded like DMV updates and forwarding magazines
Hmm.
and
Oh,
all of your
nice.
subscriptions, all of those pieces. throughout the resident life cycle, we're surveying our residents. So we're always getting that information of how they're feeling at, key milestones throughout that process. We're actually experimenting with AI right now.
Hmm.
I mean, we use technology for everything down to setting our rents each day
Okay.
and even completing work orders. So on the operations side, it's everywhere. Marketing, same thing. When I talked about how specific we can be with each marketing budget, we really do use a lot of reporting to see where the touch points are, which one is actually causing the conversion, where the
Okay.
best sources are, where our best spend is, and what that return looks like.
That's great. That's
Um,
great. Yeah. And
and then, also ever since the pandemic started, I mean, 24/7 leasing is the goal now. So our teams are in the office business hours. But really anyone could go onto our website, and that's always the goal is, you go onto the website, and if they wanted to, we love having
they,
that
they
personal
yeah,
experience,
right.
but they could do the whole process without ever speaking to anyone. They can see the apartment, they can pick their unit, they can, kind of do a virtual tour around with some of our technology and videos, and do the application without even talking with us.
Is some of that or a lot of that new because of the pandemic, or did some of those things exist?
It's definitely been amplified. It's definitely picked up. We had a lot of virtual type tours before, but the
Sure.
pandemic definitely has increased that.
Got it. So I suspect there are other firms in the market that do what you do. How do you guys differentiate your offering in the eye of, say, the investor? Whether it be an institution or a private investor, and then separately in the eyes of the consumers that you're trying to attract into, renting property.
Yeah. So for investors, I think one of the things that really helps us is probably why we're in business after 75 years. We do grow, we do look to grow, but it's very strategic and intentional. And one
Okay.
of the great things about Scully is we're market experts. So some companies will be, very focused on only Class A apartments or
Okay.
workforce housing or different categories. We can do all of it, but we really only do it in the places that we know all of the nooks and crannies of every neighborhood where we know we can be successful. And that allows us to deliver the best returns to investors.
Is there like a profile of a geographic market that tends to work best? Is that kind of how you evaluate
So,
new areas, or I'm just curious?
yeah, so we're in Pennsylvania. That's where we're founded.
Hmm.
So that's always, I think, I should know this, but it's always fluctuating. We're always bringing on new properties. I think we're about 26 or 27 properties just here in
Oh,
Pennsylvania.
wow. Okay.
And then, so that's really like our core.
Right.
We have ownership, and our team also spends a lot of time in South Florida. So we have 6 properties there. And then South Jersey is like right over the bridge from us. So a lot of the area, it's just the areas we know.
Got it.
We are looking to expand in other areas
Hmm.
into similar markets of, the similar types of markets we already work in. But we would definitely, we kind of go in, we study it. We would want to really understand it and kind of know it like a local knows, to take that
Got it. So
position. Yeah.
from an investor standpoint, you were saying you're market experts versus like class of building experts or something like that.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's it's actually great because it makes us really versatile. And I'm very familiar with the operations, even though I don't work in the operations.
Sure.
But the things you pick up in different asset classes and different types of buildings with different types of owners and partners, or whether it's our own, really brings a lot of experience that's very valuable. So I think that's what sets us apart
Got it.
from investors.
And then what about on the consumer side? I'm in one of your markets and I'm
Yeah,
shopping apartments. Why would I want to go with the Scully property over somebody else?
sure. One of our major focuses is the customer experience. I'm sure, everyone says, oh, it's the customer experience, but I had mentioned earlier our core values and guiding principles. We spend a lot of time with our teams, instilling that in them. And I think that's really what separates brands is like what you stand for as a brand and how you empower your people and your teams to be able to take that, own it, and run with it. Because you can't be there making every decision for every employee.
Right.
So that's a really important piece. And we really put a big focus there. We also put a lot into the projects that we manage. So I would say we don't we don't have any vanilla properties. Like I had mentioned, every community that we have has its own budget, its own plan.
Right.
Sometimes they're 2 blocks away from each other, like 2 streets away, and completely different because it's created for someone different. So you see some projects where you could basically pick it up and put it anywhere, and it would be a nice place to live.
Hmm.
It doesn't feel like you don't walk in and feel like you belong. So we make our community somewhere that speaks to the renter who we're specifically creating it for. And that really helps them kind of find that home.
Is there like a profile of the type of renter that you know tend to go after? Is it, or is it just really sort of market driven?
Yeah, it's market driven
Got
because
it.
we look at, in Philadelphia, for example, in Center City, we are a city of eds and meds. So colleges, universities, medical students.
That's
So
right.
depending on where a location is in relation to the hospital, that would depend on how we would develop it, how we
Right.
would market the units.
Yep.
You might make a unit that in another place, someone would be like, that's a terrible unit. There's no
Right.
light coming in. But for a medical
Right.
resident, they love that because they're coming in at off hours.
Yeah.
They just need that space to crash and
Right.
walk to the hospital.
Right.
And another, you couldn't take that and just move it somewhere else.
Right.
So we really decide on that. So it's not necessarily a specific renter. We look at
Yep.
where the opportunity is, where the location is, and then who is looking to live in that area, and then we build it for them.
Okay. That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that takes a lot of effort in terms of analyzing data and research to really understand sort of, you know, maybe what kind of amenities a given property needs. Is that a pretty involved process on your end? And do you use a lot of data and research to try and determine those kind of things?
We do.
Okay.
Yeah, we do. It is a lot of time to spend, and if one of the things I mentioned earlier is even when we're consulting on units, like if I told you, people's eyes would glaze over if you knew how many times we might look at a unit mix and see how many units are going to have, what size are they going to be, where are they going to be located, what's going to be in the corner versus in the center,
Right.
where are the bedrooms laid out. So it really takes a lot of time, but that's the difference in your return. Because when you nail it and you nail that in conjunction with the branding and everything else kind of fits and speaks to each other, that's where you get the best return because people want that product and they stay there. So we do a lot of things. We kind of combine qualitative and quantitative. We do, we survey our residents. We talk to our teams on site. We visit our properties all the time. We look for inspiration. And, for some new projects, we'll work with creative agencies and we'll, have them help us with some of that market research to kind of really understand a specific renter or, when we're looking at the amenities, we'll use that research too. Like, what would appeal to them? Like, we think this would be really cool, but does a group of, a focus group of 15 people think it? And then if we survey, would we find the same thing?
Right.
And then part of it is that we are, again, like we're operating in the markets we know. So we see what's just going on in the industry. Like what are people just doing with regular behavior? Where do they like to go? What do they do? What don't they do? We know that, although we've put in, an amenity everywhere and it's kind of a check the box amenity,
Sure.
that people don't actually use it, but they want to see that it's there when they rent. So we might make
Right.
it, but make it smaller.
Yeah.
So those are the types of things that we do.
Okay. You mentioned agencies. And you talked a little bit about your in-house team. Do you manage and like all of your advertising like activities in-house, or do you, outside of the research stuff, do you work with any outside marketing agencies, either locally or as a sort of corporately controlled group that services the different properties?
So as far as like advertising itself, we really do almost all of that in-house. And that's because most of our portfolio is pretty stable, which, meaning that
Right.
we filled the building and
Yep.
we have residents stay with us a long time, or we can anticipate when people will leave and kind of backfill. So it's not like a huge exodus at any point.
Sure.
So we're able to do our marketing in-house. We do like all of our own ads campaigns, AdWords, creating ads, all of those things. For like really, really big up and coming lease up projects, we
Right.
would use an agency for a very short time, potentially if we feel like we need it in that market. And if we feel, for example, we need like a very, very strong social media presence for 7 months, and we want to make sure that people are creating content and
Right.
custom content for a while, we might do that during that period. But then, like,
Once
once
it
it's
gets
stable, we'll take it
established.
over.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
makes sense, makes sense.
Mhm.
So, just a couple more questions. I'm curious,
Sure.
does most of your effort, just getting back to sort of the private investor and institution piece of it, does
Mhm.
most of your effort in attracting private investors and institutions, is it driven by a sales team, or do you have sort of a B2B marketing effort to let investors know that you exist and can be a good good option for them?
Yeah, another really interesting and timely question for us. Over the history of our company, we have really been built on relationships, local relationships,
Okay.
and a lot of it's been most of our growth, I would say, until the last like 2 to 3 years has been reputation based.
Okay.
Just people hearing of our firm, reaching out to us. As we've put more of a focus on growth, we have expanded departments into new business development. So looking for third party management, as well as some people looking specifically for acquisitions.
Got it.
So for the first time, we're actually, we've had people in those positions, but now we're actually getting to the level where we really want to start branding and marketing Scully.
Got it.
So that's kind of taking a more B2B approach for the first time in the last couple of years. Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. Is that
Mhm.
so that's a because of a desire to grow a little bit more aggressively, or is that because of the market has gotten more competitive, or a little bit of both, would you say?
Probably a little bit of both.
Okay. Okay.
It's something that we've kind of, the market's changing, multifamily is changing, opportunities are changing, and
Right.
we would like to start kind of growing into some other markets as
Yeah.
well.
Okay.
And also, there's so much development happening in our markets now, so the opportunity to work with developers is more now than it was,
Right. Right.
15, 20 years ago.
Cool. That's great. So I've got just two
Mhm.
more questions for you. I know you don't work with agencies a lot, but you've obviously played in the marketing space for a while. Any advice you give to marketers thinking about bringing a new agency on board?
Yeah, absolutely. So while I said we don't really work with them on the advertising side, so
Hmm.
like running campaigns for us and things like that, but we do work with branding agencies for all of our brands as far as like the creation, sometimes like the messaging as well,
Hmm.
but definitely the design look.
Okay.
Um, so I would say find a firm that aligns with your company values and culture. I think
Okay.
that's really important. And then I think on the client side, like if you're the intermediary for a developer or a client, and you're going to match them with a branding agency for a particular project, I think it's really important to have options because chemistry is really key in that situation. So if you have a client with a strong personality, and then an agency with a strong person, like you have to know, they have to be comfortable with who they're working with.
Sure.
And since they're not as familiar with the process and how it goes, sometimes it has to be an agency that's a little understanding and doesn't mind spending that extra time explaining it.
Yeah. And any
Yeah.
advice you'd give to an agency or a marketer, I guess it would be really, obviously sometimes that fit thing you don't really know until you get into the relationship. Any
Mhm.
advice you give to a marketer that was looking at multiple agencies on maybe the best way to sort of unearth whether or not they'll be a good fit before you actually bring them on board?
Yeah, for sure. Checking references, like
Okay.
asking for some references, reaching out to some other companies who have worked with them to explore what that experience and process was a
Right.
little deeper from someone who's not necessarily selling it to you and telling you how it's going to go. How did it really go? And does it seem like it would
Yeah.
be the right fit?
Yep. Cool. Okay, great. And my last question is, if an agency were trying to knock down your door and attempting to win business from you, what advice would you give them?
I would say I think the most important thing for me is anyone who's hiring someone, you want to hire a partner, not a vendor. So seek out or set out to be a partner like in the long term rather than just like short term project. I think one of the things agencies can do is get so caught up in hours or rounds, like sometimes doing that extra round revision that's going to make somebody's client happy is really going to solidify. Like if you can make their life easier, then they're going to come to you all the time. And I don't think there's any marketer, especially if you're managing multiple brands, that wants to jump from agency to agency. You
Sure.
really want to have someone who knows the ins and outs of your company, your brand, your values, your work style. Um, so finding that is like key. Having someone that you can call and don't have to spend a ton of time explaining the backstory of your company
Right.
is valuable. So I would say relationships,
Yep.
and becoming a partner. Yeah.
Cool. Having experience in your category, is that going to be important to you? I'm just curious.
Oh, yes. I
Okay.
should have said that. Yes, for
No.
sure. Well, actually, that would be more for, you know, for both really, for a marketer looking for an
Sure.
agency.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's really important. Just because someone can do amazing design for like bourbon is very different than, than another vertical or industry.
Right.
It's different skills, and it's really important to understand that. So yeah, I think for agencies, it's good to be able to have experience in that industry, or be able to show something comparable and kind of relate it
Right.
to the
Right.
industry you work
Yep.
in.
Yep. That's
Yeah.
great. Well, listen,
So
Renee, really appreciate you making the time today. I mean, I certainly knew that companies like yours existed out there because, apartment buildings don't just run themselves. So,
yeah.
but it's been fascinating sort of digging into Scully, learning more about it. The insights that you provided today in terms of how you manage sort of this multi-location business, I think is going to be a great assist to other marketers out there, trying to think of new ideas, how to, maintain the quality and equity of the brand and still give a little bit of latitude to sort of that local market so that they can bring their own sort of flavor into, how they manage their business. So I think it's been great. And,
Yep.
again, really appreciate you making the time today and wish you a great rest of the day.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's
Yep.
fun.